Yep. And I'm going to read a brief statement about dana. In Buddhism, when practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice dana are to offer support to those who share the teachings, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. Please support their practice by giving what you can. You can either do this directly or through Great Tree, and we will pass it on to them. So in the chat, you'll find a link to the donation page, as well as an email, info@greattreetemple.org. So if you give, please send a quick email there stating what the dana is for. In the chat, you'll also find the fall practice schedule. And I will ask if you could hide your video, just because there are a lot of us on the call, and that helps with bandwidth and video choppiness. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to say about dana, for those of you who are in the writing retreat, that please offer some dana to Peggy if you can. Her writing is something that is certainly a spiritual teaching. It's a spiritual practice. So you can, I didn't hear that, I wasn't listening to the whole thing, Trey, because I've heard it before. But you can find the link, you can send it to Great Tree, and we'll send it on to Peggy if you have something you would like to offer to her. And also, you need to let us know through info@greattreetemple.org that it's for her, so that we know where to put it. Otherwise, we'll just think it's a regular donation. So today I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and something which Peggy and I have talked about a lot. In fact, she often has brought it up in talks when she's, or in her retreats when she led writing retreats at Great Tree Temple. And that is something, the Japanese word is yuge. And it consists of two characters. The first character is you. It actually means free play, and gay, which means transformation through play. So both of the characters have play in them. And when I first came across this, I came across it when I was doing some translation with a friend of mine, a Japanese friend of mine. And it's translated, it's a word that is used by a Zen master from the 13th century, Dogen Zenji. And I always thought of Dogen as pretty austere and kind of serious. So when I came across this, the translation of it in the text I was reading was disporting. And I didn't even know what disporting meant, so I had to look that up. And it, let's see, I wrote down what the dictionary definition of disporting is. Just let's see if I can pull that up. Disporting. right. I looked it up and now I can't find it. But anyway, it means something like frolicking and, um, you know, playing, just kind of, it has that light feeling of playing. And I thought, well, this must be a bad translation because I thought Zen was a lot more serious than that. But actually, when I looked up the characters, as I told you, one of them means to freely play, and the other one means to be transformed through this free play. I didn't put free in the title, but I do think that free play for me evokes the idea of not having a structured play even. Someone mentioned that frequently it's looked at as like making a sandcastle. When you make a sandcastle, you're just doing it for the enjoyment of making it. You know that it's not going to last. You know that not long after you leave, it's probably going to get all crumbled when the water comes rushing in. But you don't care because you're just enjoying it. So I came across this character, like I say, when we were doing this translation, and I said, this is amazing. I said this to my Japanese friend who had was doing the translation with, and he said, oh, that's not such a big deal. That's not such an important concept. But I didn't care. To me, it really was. And so when I got back to Minnesota, I was living in Japan at the time. When I got back to Minnesota, I started talking about this because I wanted people to understand what an important, well, not just that it was important to me, but that it was something that was talked about by this famous, great, revered Zen master that we all took so very seriously. And people really picked up on it. And they said, oh yeah, people were discussing it and talking about how the best inventions most inventions are made from people just playing around with something. And then someone mentioned to me one day that Katagiri Roshi had given a lecture on Yuge. So I went back and dug it up. It happened during a time when I was off practicing at the monastery. And so I dug it up. He told me when it was, and I found it and I transcribed it. And Katagiri Roshi made the comment that, and I don't even know if I can find it in my notes, but that he really feels like nowadays people are just too serious in everything that they do. And that what we need to bring into our practice is kind of lightening things up. And I must say that one of the things that he pointed out to me one time when he was on sabbatical in Japan and I visited him, he said, have you noticed that American meditators are much more serious and that our retreats are much more intense than they are in Japan? And I said, yeah. And I think, not only is there certain intensity and stress in the world in general, and has been for many years, but I think in our American culture, there's something about maybe our Christian ethic that brings forth a real seriousness and intensity and really stressfulness. So but this idea actually goes back to the whole spirit of Soto Zen practice. There's different kinds of meditation practice, and I actually I was introduced to meditation when I was 15. Well, actually, I was 14, and I belonged to a group of, I guess you would say, spiritual seekers, teenage spiritual seekers, and we were asked to make a commitment to meditate for 15 minutes a day. But the way it was taught to me is that you do a spiritual reading and then you kind of ponder it. And what would happen during those 15 minutes for me is that I would do the reading and be inspired, and then I would sit for a few minutes, and then pretty soon I'd notice that my mind was going off on something else, and then I'd say, oh yeah, that's right, and I would bring it back to that reading, and then my mind would go off and I'd come back. And so that was the whole practice that I did. And I built up to doing that for about an hour a day. And then when I got into my 20s, things kind of changed for me, and I stopped doing that. And so then I got to the point where I thought, well, I'll try. I need to try to do meditation again. So I went to study with an Indian teacher who was teaching in Minneapolis. They gave mantras. And I never really actually tried using a mantra because I just didn't want to do something that had so much stuff. I just wanted a very simple spiritual practice. And I wasn't trying to get something. I was just trying to kind of calm my life down. So I gave up meditation for several years. And when I was about 28, I thought my life was just falling apart. I was having a terrible relationship. But this person that I was in a relationship with started introducing me to Zen meditation and started reading from books, inspiring quotes and things. So every time I would have difficulty in the relationship, which was, like I said, it was a terrible relationship, I would sit down I could barely sit down for 3 minutes at that point. I would set my timer and I would stare. I'd look at my timer. But somehow, even though it was a crazy kind of way to approach meditation, when I got up, I would feel different. Nothing was resolved, but I would feel a little bit more like the edge was off. So I started kind of thinking, well, maybe I should try this again. Maybe I should find a good meditation teacher. So some of you know that story. I went on a trip looking for a meditation teacher. I grew up in Minnesota, and so I just knew that there were no really good meditation teachers in Minnesota. So I went on a trip, and I ended up in San Francisco, broke, and I had to get a job when I got there. And so I happened into the Zen Center one day, and I was really quite energized by it, and I decided to kind of try meditation again. And in the process, I got kind of pulled by a group of people to go and hear Katagiri Roshi, who was visiting from Minnesota. And Katagiri Roshi affected me so much. I thought, this is the person I want to learn how to meditate from. He had a very strong presence, and he had a very strong meditation practice. And so that's why I think I felt that from him. I don't honestly know what he said that morning. I don't think that I could even understand most of what he said because his Japanese accent was so thick. It took me really a couple years to even understand him, his speech. But there was something about him that I felt I had something I could learn from him. But the thing about Katagiri Roshi, and I went to the introductory class 3 times because I wanted to get it right. The thing about him is that he really wouldn't give you any information about what you should do. And I talked about Dogen Zenji at the beginning. He was the one that I picked up this term Yuge from. And he, Katagiri Roshi was a strong follower of Dogen. And so he would talk about Dogen's writings all the time. And Dogen's writings were just impossible for me to understand. I don't know whether it's the translation or whether, couldn't figure out what it was. but Katagiri Roshi was talking about him all the time. But whenever we asked him what we should be doing when we were meditating, he would say, just sit up straight. Well, not straight because our body isn't straight. They say just sit up, align your spine, and breathe into your belly. He would give us all these instructions. And Dogen's actually, his first writing was about just giving the instructions about how to sit. And then Dogen says, think of not thinking. What does that mean? So, but this was the only real instruction that he gave about what to do with our mind. Think of not thinking. And then he goes on to say, how do you think of not thinking? And the usual translation is non-thinking. Well, that's helpful, right? So for years, I kept asking Katagiri Roshi, what does that mean, non-thinking? What does it mean, think of not thinking? Well, Dogen wrote first in Chinese because he had gone to China, and he had actually, Dogen was raised in the courts of the emperor because his parents were both connected with the emperor. So, he was quite scholarly, and he had studied Chinese, classical Chinese. So when he first started writing about Buddhism after he came back from Japan, about Zen, he wrote in classical Chinese, which Japanese people can't read because there's only some characters that are used in Chinese in the Japanese language, but the Japanese written language is different from Chinese written language. So the Japanese are still translating Dogen. So my teacher in Japan retranslated this in Japanese, and it got translated again into English. And it said, he translated as think of not thinking. How do you do that? Just let thinking be. Just leave it alone. And this was really, really helpful for me to understand how this practice of Soto Zen works, because Soto Zen, the practice is called Shikantaza. It's very, very different from other kinds of meditation practices. Shikantaza means just sit. Katagiri Roshi used to say, Shikantaza means just sit down and shut up. And what he was pointing to is that there's nothing really that we have to do when we sit down. And sometimes I say that Shikantaza means just resist the compulsion to do something. Because our mind always wants to do something. Our mind always wants to grasp onto something. And when we resist that inclination, that's that moment of saying, oh, wait, I'm thinking too much. That moment of coming back, even from the beginning of my meditation, coming back to those inspired words, or in the case of maybe a mantra, coming back to the mantra. When our mind wanders off and does all kinds of other things and wants to engage and grasp onto thoughts and that really make us very confused ultimately. When we do that, we get stuck. We can easily get stuck because we don't give ourselves the opportunity to let go long enough to experience life in its bigness. Life is bigger than our minds. Life is bigger than this body. Life is bigger than us and the people around us. It includes everything. And in Dogen's writing, he talks about how, in one of his writings, he talks about how when we let go in this way, we all of a sudden the trees and walls and grasses and everything starts to speak truth. Everything starts to help us experience what life really is. So it's not a matter of interpreting what life is, it's a matter of experiencing what life is. And when we sit down and shut up, we have those moments of experiencing what life is. And strangely, we begin to experience those moments when we notice how busy our mind is. When we know those moments that we notice, oh, my mind is so busy, immediately that is letting go. And so, for even a brief moment before we say, oh, I have to stop my mind from being so busy, stopping your mind, trying to stop your mind from being so busy, trying to stop your mind at all is another way of thinking. It's another way of doing. And people sometimes tell me that they've actually been able to stop their thoughts. And it's hard for me to believe that because I think that thoughts are a very natural thing. There's a teacher, Uchiyama Roshi, who used to say, thoughts are secretions of the brain. It's very natural to secrete thoughts. If we think too much, just like if we eat too much, if we have too many gastric juices, we might get sick. If we have too many thoughts, it makes us sick. There's something that we know about life because we're part of life that we sometimes forget about and forget to experience fully and are unable to experience fully because we're so busy doing and thinking, not just physical doing, but thinking doing. When you're sitting on a cushion facing a wall for a period of time, it gets really boring. But I think what we call boredom is what we don't is those things that we don't understand, because there's a lot in life that we can't understand intellectually. We can't make sense of it intellectually. So this boredom is very, very important to spiritual practice. If we don't get bored, our mind, it means our mind is not letting go. If we keep ourselves thinking all the time and engaging all the time in our thoughts and activities, we have no time to just be in life. And so meditation, it's called Zazen. In Japanese, Za means to sit and Zen means to meditate. The original character for Zen is translated as meditation, but if you look at the original character in Chinese, the ancient character, it means one character, it's composed of two characters that are put together to make a third character. But if you break them down, one of them means to clear the land, and the other means to build an altar. And through our meditation practice, by coming back, and I always say, if you come back to your breath, it calms your body and mind. I do it with the kids and it works. Taking that deep breath into your belly and breathing it out slowly and quietly. And usually in meditation, we say breathing through your nose. But even if you breathe through your mouth, breathing out slowly and quietly, there's a calming that takes place in your mind and in your body, and thus your mind, because our body and mind are not two separate things. They're all part of the same being. So this practice helps us to learn how to notice when we engage too much in thinking, and helps us to not overthink, but step back and give ourselves a chance to take a breath and just let go of the thoughts. I've noticed in my meditation practice that, especially when I have to give a talk, I'm constantly trying to, think about that and what I'm going to talk about. And so one of the practices I've started to do is to take a deep breath. And just imagine that that breath is in the middle of my skull and breathe out. And one of the reasons I do that and let go, think about letting go of the thoughts. One of the reasons I do that, Kadagir Roshi used to always talk about our frontal lobe, that when we think too much, he said we get a headache. I don't always get a headache, but I do notice that my frontal lobe gets very tight when I think too much. And so in this little practice that I have developed of just taking a breath and breathing out of my skull is an opportunity to just free my mind. And honestly, I feel some resistance every time I do it because I have this perception that if I don't hold on to a thought, that I'm going to lose it. But in fact, what happens when I do that, often what happens is that a new perspective just kind of is there. It just kind of comes from I know not where. And this, to me, this kind of practice, and one of the reasons I like this this spirit of yuge, of transformation through play, of playing, really bringing that playful spirit into meditation practice, and from there, everything that we do. Because really, meditation practice is a practice of doing nothing. It's much easier for us in other things that we do to take that breath and step back and let it go and say, okay, what's here? Just let things come up. And that's why it works so well for the writing practice that Peggy introduces to us, and what Peggy offers to us in this writing, where she tells us just keep your pencil to the page. You don't have to edit. When we used to have classes at Peggy's house, she had a little sign that she had hung up on the wall, and it said judgment. And she told us the reason she had that hanging on her wall was to remind us to suspend judgment while we were there. Suspend our judgment of our writing, not do editing, not even worry about punctuation, just write, and to not think about it ahead of time. Last night she told us that when she gives us a prompt to write about, she doesn't tell us how long we're going to write for, because it's very easy to kind of formulate a whole like complete idea if we have some thought. And what she's encouraging us to do in our writing is to just allow it to unfold. I always say patience. My definition of patience is allowing life to unfold. I really think that this yuge practice, this playfulness, this free play, which transforms us, is something that is relevant to everything that we do in our lives. Things that we like to do or things that we don't like to do. If we bring the spirit of play, it helps us to allow a bigger life to speak through us, and it helps us to allow even our own wisdom to come forth, things that we know, but our mind is focusing so much that we can't access. There's a lot of times I find myself writing things that I didn't even know that I knew when I write it that way. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about it in terms of taking a walk. He says, you should try to take a walk without having a destination. And of course, you need to give yourself a lot of space, maybe a couple hours or something, in order to do that. Because if we have a destination, or if we're restricted by time, we miss a lot of the scenery along the way. I discovered this by trying to do this. I was taking the same walk every day. But when I decided to take a walk without having the idea that I was going to a particular place, that I had to get there, that I had only a certain amount of time, that I'm going to make a loop, I just said, okay, I'm just going to walk, and I won't, if I don't get to a destination, that's fine. The destination is the walk itself. And then I started seeing things along the way that I had never noticed before. Little tiny flowers and beautiful scenery. And, the day before I hadn't seen it. So, but the thing that he points out is that at first we're going to resist doing this because our mind wants to grasp onto something which is definable. I am going to take a walk and it's going to take me 10 minutes. And when we do that, it gives us a sense of security, like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I have a sense of what's happening. So Dogen Zenji suggests that when we meditate, that we have this kind of spirit of playfulness. And at that time, everything, the fences and walls and grasses and trees, everything starts to speak truth, because truth is just the experience of life itself that is beyond really our understanding. We can't understand life really, but yet we do understand life on some level because we are part of life. We're part of that bigger life. And, if you can look at it kind of scientifically, even, that we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out something that helps other beings. And so there's constant exchange going on. He talks in this same writing, it's called Bendoa, about something called Jijiyu Samadhi. And Jijiyu Samadhi is an expression of the joy that we experience when we have this, that we experience when we just let go and we experience the giving and receiving, which happens all the time in life, which is imperceptible to the human consciousness. And he goes on to explain that. He says, even though all these things are speaking truth to us, it's not something that this truth is not something that we can grasp with our human mind. Did I freeze? I got a message that this is unstable. So to me, the practice of just sitting, in other words, not trying to do anything, just sitting there, looking at it as a kind of playing. We all know how to play because we did it before we went to school. Our mind was stream of consciousness. I've watched this in my nieces and nephews. You can't carry on a logical conversation with a 4-year-old because they don't think in the same logical way. They don't have that structured thought until they get into school and start to get that structure or have that structure presented to them in some way. And so it's total stream of consciousness. You ask them a question and they are off on another subject. But that kind of play is also a way of learning about life. It's really a way of experiencing life in its fullness. And it takes a while to be able to recognize that experience in meditation because we want to get something. People sometimes, there were some people that used to come to Great Tree. They don't live in this area anymore, but they still come online once in a while. But they used to really argue with me about just sitting. They said, yes, but we don't accomplish anything when we're just sitting. Yeah, that's the point. Don't try to accomplish something. Don't try to get something. There really is nothing we can grasp onto in life because life is always changing. Always. Dogen Zenji says that there are 6,400,099,480 moments in a day. Now you can break that down, but even if you try to break it down, I know because I've tried to do this, how many moments in a minute, how many moments in a second, your mind becomes completely dismantled. And that dismantledness of your mind really helps you to let go of the whole idea that there is something to get, because anything that we think we've gotten doesn't exist anymore by the time we've gotten it. So I'm going to open this up to discussion and questions. Maybe some of you question some of what I've said, or maybe some of you have some thoughts about what I've said. We won't put you on the screen. I know there's some people that don't want to be on our YouTube video. So, but we'll hear your voice. And if you want, you can raise your hand. If you don't know how to raise your hand, go down to the bottom of your screen where it says reactions. Just hover over the bottom. Some of you, it might be on the top. And click reactions, and there's a little place where it says raise hand. So you can do that, or you can just try and say something. Okay? And you can show yourself if you want, so I can see who you are.
I've raised my hand.
Okay.
Right there. This reminded me of a wonderful teaching about play that really was transformative in my life. I was an art student in college, and at one point I realized I was not going to be Rembrandt, and I destroyed all my art. And that was the end of that. And I didn't feel bitter, but that's what I did. And many years later, after I started Zen practice, someone gave me a sumie set, or is that what you call it? An ink brush thing, ink, brush, and a really long roll of rice paper. And so, that was kind of like a toy. It wasn't going to be art. I just sat down at my desk and opened the paper. And I had a Zen book with an inso on the front, right? And so I just started drawing circles with ink, and I'd move the paper, I'd draw a circle, move the paper, draw a circle. I filled up the whole thing. And then I cut them apart and I taped them all up on my wall. And I thought, well, there were some I just didn't like as well as the others. And I began taking a few down until, I must have had 50 or more. Then I got 10, and then I got it down to 5, and then 3 and 2. And then this was the one I liked best. And I realized that in that process, which I felt as play rather than art, I separated out the criticism. And the choosing among all of them was just discernment. It was a neutral thing. And that was really a revelation for me. And it freed me up after all those years to go on and draw stuff if I wanted to. But from then on, it has always been play. So I'm really happy that came back to me.
Thank you. And that reminds me of when I studied calligraphy in Japan. They teach you how to make a dot because all of the characters come from the dot. And so you start with this little dot, which is really a three movement process, and you just kind of move the brush in a certain way. And then when you do a long stroke, then you do that process to make it long. And if you do the side stroke, you make the little dot going sideways. And so I was working on the dot, and I made a whole page of just dots. I was just making pages and pages of dots. And so I sent one of those pages to Katagiri Roshi. just so that he'd know that what I was working on. And he was in Minnesota. And somebody told me he'd put it up on the bulletin board. I was very embarrassed because I was like one of the worst ones in our class, you know. And but many years later at Great Tree, when we started Great Tree, there was a woman by the name of Ki Chung, and she's a Korean woman who has studied a lot of calligraphy. She's a very good calligrapher, but she brought this kind of playfulness to it. She'd play music, and she just encouraged us to play with it. She does a lot of what Peggy does in these writing retreats. She comes up with these creative things to help kind of get us going. And I started playing with it, and my fear of calligraphy just vanished, because, you know, it was the same kind of experience that you were talking about, making that circle. You don't really have to, you know, do things in a certain way in order to get a good product. In fact, I think probably the most creative artists are the ones that just have learned to play around with things. So thank you for bringing that up, Sarah. Other thoughts? All I'm seeing is names. Go ahead, Kala, and you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. I on and off between my regular job when I was working, I watch kids. I pay attention. I watch with families that I know when they need help. And I've gotten so much joy out of these kids. I end up becoming a kid, and, you know, it becomes who's going to be more outrageous. And since this pandemic, I haven't been able to see these kids as frequently. And I must say, I really miss their crazy, wild energy. And, you know, they get such a kick out of scaring me. And I respond because that's me. I'm very I have a sensitive system. And she just gets so giggly when she gets to, you know, tease me about stuff. And then the things that can come out of their mouths. She and her friend and I went for a walk in their neighborhood, going to a friend's house. And it was summer, and there were a lot of people doing lawn work and construction. So the guys were in their trucks having lunch or break, relaxing. And I just never forget, her friend Margaret looks to me, because I'm saying hello to everybody. She says, you know, Calla, you shouldn't say hello to these people. They may want to offer you some coffee. And I said, no, that's okay. It's not going to work with coffee. But, you know, I mean, it's just how their little brains work, and they're fabulous. You know, I really miss that energy when I'm not with kids.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's just such a gift.
It's a kind of fearlessness that kids have, you know.
Oh my God, on the playground, I'm like a crazy woman watching these kids fly around.
I always think about how did we learn how to speak? How did we learn how to do things when we were babies and when we were little kids? And you know, they just watch us. They just watch people and figure things out, that try things out. And I often say that if we had to learn how to walk as adults, you know, we probably wouldn't be able to do it, because kids will stand up and they're like, whoa, I stood up, and then they'll fall down, and then they'll stand up again, and they'll take one step and they'll fall down, and they'll say, whoa, I
feel about it.
Step. But if we do that, you know, we take a step and we fall down, we say, well, that's not my thing. We'll go to the house. What? We don't even want to try it to begin with, you know?
Oh yeah, that's true. When we get older, we get smaller.
I know, it's so true. So fearlessness is a big, nice byproduct of meditation practice for me.
That's true.
Even when I feel that fear coming up or resistance coming up, I remember it's just resistance. It's just fear.
Understood. Yeah.
And there's always something beyond that fear. In fact, I often think that, you know, when you do something as stupid as sitting and facing a wall, that you have to let go of something. Because who does that? That's just stupid.
That's true.
Any other thoughts about this?
Thank you.
Uh,
No.
Megan, your hand is up.
Good morning. In the context of writing, I really appreciate this whole invitation to play. It's personally, it's transformative. And I liked what you were talking about the seriousness of approaching your practice, you know, and having to loosen up around that and the discovery around that. I have not been able to write. I've been in a PhD program. And I think because, you know, I was at the end where I had to produce this artifact, this document, but very much in a very disciplined, ritualized machine of scholarship. And I was blocked. I was blocked. Why is that? It's almost as if there was a force kind of pulling me from it. And I think it is because my being wants to live and express much more of this sense of creativity and what's emerging and what's new, what's more phenomenological, what arises, right, when you sit and meditate. So I really appreciate this writing time because I write and it's because it's free and the freedom in it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yes, you know, and I think even what I noticed with these writing retreats is even giving myself that time and saying, this is what I'm doing at this time, gives a sense of spaciousness too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Pam, did you have your hand up? Were you going to say something?
Yes. Yeah. Going back to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Going back to what we learned from kids when our son was, I don't know, around 4, we would sometimes ask him to do something like pick up your toys or whatever. And his response sometimes would be, no, Foo. And to me, it meant, I'm not going to do that. Now let's lighten up and move on, you know? And it just kind of stopped me in my tracks, you know, like, oh, okay. And so I sometimes use that, but also as yes, Foo, to just plain yes to it. And it's that playfulness to it, you know, whatever is going on, yes, you know, but also, yes, Foo, lighten up. So yeah, something else I learned from a child. And it's crazy that that's how we learn to play because we forgot, you know, we need kids to remind us. So, yeah.
And we often, you know, brush kids off.
Yeah.
You know, like what they're doing is not important and don't realize the value of it.
Yeah. Yeah. What a treasure.
Yes.
Little
Yes.
treasures.
So you see the hand that's up right now. I don't know whether you can all see the hand that's up, but it's Brian Hyatt, and he has the name Yuge, which I gave when he received the precepts to remind him about that playfulness. Yuge, did you want to say something?
I did. Thank you. And thank you for that name because it was perfect for me. It is perfect for me because I got stuck often in a thought loop and I would think about things and try to parse it out, and I was all about objectives. So I really needed to actually take a step back from all of that in my practice. But I wanted to mention that I teach photography, and one of the first things I realized about my students was they wanted to check boxes. They wanted to know, what do you want me to photograph? What do you want me to see? And the way I came up with dealing with that was to have them take a walk. And it was that walk you're talking about without a destination. Like I would say, okay, we're going to go downtown. we're going to spend an hour, and I want you to just walk, and I want you to do it individually, and whatever you see, whatever is interesting to you, if you stop and you notice something, take a photograph. That might be an opportunity to take a photograph. And it started to change the way they were seeing things, and I really appreciated that. And one of my favorite photographers, William Eggleston, does a lot of these walks without a destination, and the pictures are always really interesting and unlike anything I've seen before. So that I think helps to shape the way they see things. And I wanted to mention a really quick story about my mom, because to me, I had an experience with her at the end of her life, which kind of illustrated this whole idea of Yuge to me. She was always a joker. She was always telling a joke or playing a practical joke. So she really had that sense of freedom and free play. And so she was dying, and probably is going to be the next day, they thought. And we were in her room that night. We had a party. And so I had had wonderful talks with her, deep, wonderful talks in the couple of days before. And every minute she was going to say something to me. I was hanging on these words. And so she asked me to come closer. And I leaned forward, and I leaned pretty close. And she looked up, and she locked her eyes up. And I thought, what is she looking at? And she said, I want you to do something about your eyebrows. So they had gotten too much. And I thought, she got one on me, because she set that up, and we all got a good laugh out of it. But it was I think, a great thing to know that even in that situation, she was still there with that. So yeah, and that's a good memory for me in her life. So thank you.
We have a few more minutes. If anybody else has something they want to share or question about what I said. One thing, I came across a quote. There's a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which points to something that is also part of this Soto Zen practice of returning to beginner's mind, which is, of course, the mind of a child. And he says in this book, I discovered that that it is necessary, absolutely necessary, to believe in nothing. That is, we have to believe in something which has no form and no color, something which exists before all form and color exists, before all form and colors appear. No matter what you believe in, if you become attached to it, your belief will be based more or less on self-centered idea. In other words, we kind of we think that the way we're thinking is the way things are. It is absolutely necessary for everyone to believe in nothing, but I do not mean voidness. There is something, but that something is something which is always prepared for taking some particular form. And he also says in this book that when we meditate, we do nothing, and we stand up, we create the world. So it's like we're seeing things in a totally new way. Peggy, I see your face. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I did. I do. I wanted to thank you, because sometimes it helps me to understand what I'm teaching. To hear it, through like your experience, because you've come to my workshops or classes for such a long time. And this whole idea of the relationship or of the writing to meditation. I mean, I've seen that from the beginning, but you articulate it in a way that I don't know that I have articulated it. That it's, yes, I mean, it is, it's giving up what we think writing is supposed to be and letting it just be. And that is just so important, to remind ourselves, just write, just sit. You don't have to make it into something unless that's what calls you to do. Because often out of this kind of playing around with the words, we find ideas or images that are new and fresh and can be explored. And if we don't give space for that creativity, if we're not willing to build the sandcastle and have it washed away, it becomes, I think, what Megan was not trying, she got at with it, becomes this academic exercise. And when my son was in graduate school in history, we really talked a lot about that process, that there was a certain format he had to follow to write his papers. And he wasn't supposed to deviate from that format, which really kind of took all the fun out of it. So I really want to thank you for the mirroring you did this morning, and sharing your experience of the writing with everybody. So thank you.
And I just want to say, that structure is also a form of what we have to do in life. We can't ignore the structures either. They can be very helpful for us, because it's something that people have tried and it works in some way, like a haiku or something like that. It has a certain form and it makes you kind of condense things. But I think we often get too caught up in the structure of life and in the relative aspect of life, and forget that there's something much bigger than what we think or what we can think. So
Yes.
I'm gonna finish this. We'll stay on. Those of you that are doing the writing retreat can stay on. But Yuge, did you want to give any announcements before we give back the merit, and then we'll give back the merit?
Just a very quick one. I just wanted to remind everyone in the chat box, there are 2 files that are about our fall practice days. One is the general announcement, and then the second one is the schedule. And you can download those. But if you are free to join us for any one of the practice days, I would like to invite everybody to do that as much time as you can. Thank you.
Yeah, and anybody, I don't know, anybody who's here who's interested in the Braintree schedule, you can find it on our website. So whenever we do anything, we always give back the merit. In other words, acknowledging that it's not just something to know, but it's something that we are a part of, and acknowledging the bigger life which we are a part of. And we do it by call and response, which of course doesn't work on Zoom very well. So if you respond, keep yourself muted. And here's how it goes. May the merit of this practice benefit all beings and bring peace. So that's all. Next week, I can't remember who's speaking. Do you know who's speaking next week? Or Trey, or?
I don't have that right now.
Okay, well, you can find it on our website. We usually have different speakers every week. It was my turn, so here I am. But other than that, we're finished. And those of you who are in the writing retreat can stay on. We'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll continue with the retreat until 12 o'clock. So you can just stay on this site.